Muy buenos dias, Son Upon Seven family. So good to have you here with us. And I hope that you have been enjoying the conversation. It was very enlightening. I mean, I learned so much about supplements, so we demystify them. And if you want to know more and get your consultation going, contact Educo Gym. They're available online. And if you're in Belmopan, you can always drop by and check out what they have for you. Again, it's a holistic approach to well being. So there's definitely something for you going on there. And now we're going to be having another conversation, which is pretty interesting as well. Wow, quite a way to start a new year. So we're talking about carbon credits. So have you heard the conversation on carbon credits? So today we're going to find out what it is about. And of course, there was also on the news about people that are selling carbon credits and it's fake. So let's demystify that as well and find out, what was the whole backstory there. So giving us this enlightening talk, we have Dr. Lennox Gladden, who's the Chief Climate Change Officer. Dr. Lennox is joining us via Zoom. Good morning, Dr. Lennox. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm fine. And yourself?
We're great. We're great. This is going to be a very, very interesting conversation. I've had some friends that they would be like, who is selling fake carbon credits?
I'm like, how do you even do that? Like,
exactly.
I'm trying to think about the process that goes into, but I also, this sounds bad to say, but I have to commend people for their creativity. Like, I'm never even thinking of its possibility, but somehow people find a way to make something fake like that, carbon credits.
Definitely. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us via Zoom to have this conversation. Ren, so let's get going on it.
So can we go into just like a general basis of what carbon credits are exactly? Because I would like people to just get a synopsis to understand what we're getting into first.
Okay, all right. So I was tuning into the conversation earlier, and I will start off by saying or asking you, what are your thoughts as it relates to carbon credits, right? Your perspective. I know you guys have been hearing a lot about it, right? Before I get into it, I would like to hear your views. How do you interpret carbon credits?
I'll pass on the mic to Renata. Yeah, I mean, whenever I think about carbon credits, there definitely has to go something when it has to, like, what's stored within, I'd say, like, wildlife, and it has to be like trees, but also corals, given the amount of corals that's there. And I am, from what I've studied also, there's like countries that would pay you to like keep your carbon, like keep your forest alive in order for the carbon absorption to happen. That was a lot. What are your thoughts, Ren?
I don't even think about the coral parts. I just automatically think about carbon footprints, and I think about the bigger countries, and then I look at the smaller countries, us that have the flora and fauna and all these different things, and then looking at our forestries, and then going into that and seeing how we it's like a balancing stage for me, where the carbon credits what the bigger countries are trying to, like with the fossil fuels and how they're damaging our ozone layer and all these things, that the carbon credits come in and like balance it out, because we need that level. So that's how I think about it, like the forest balancing out. So when we sell carbon credits, to me, in my mind, it's like we're selling parts of our forest that do the good part that balance out the effect. In my mind, that's how I think about it. But I'm open up to be corrected right now.
No. You're both correct. And mostly the carbon credits themselves are then sold or purchased by either individuals or companies. For the most part, it's
So Mr. Gladden is experiencing
some minor technical difficulties
on his end.
But I think it's interesting to see how that, companies purchase the carbon credits. You ever thought about, because you know that you're damaging the ozone layer, damaging the environment, that you're going to purchase carbon credits because you're trying to equalize things? You thought about that?
Yeah, I hear how that goes.
Because it's normally the bigger countries that do that,
Yeah.
Not the smaller countries, because to be honest, our carbon footprint is really small.
Yeah. So it definitely like aligns with that. It's like so obviously they're like the big emitters when you talk about greenhouse gases. And so they're, like, as you rightly mentioned, so they're paying us to conserve our forests, for us to being able to equalize the whole greenhouse effect that's going on.
People will call us a good deal, Kev. Imagine like you to get paid to make sure you just preserve your forest.
Right, and Belize has a lot of like protected areas as well.
Do.
So we're definitely right in line with business with this. Folks, so we're experiencing technical difficulties. Any guidance from the studio? Okay, so we're gonna go on a quick commercial break while Mr. Gladden gets his internet going. So we'll be right back with you to continue the conversation on carbon credits. Stay tuned. And we are back to continue the conversation on carbon credits. So thank you so much for being patient and staying with us, because it's all about learning today. We were quizzed just a while ago on
And I
what are
was
our
like,
thoughts
oh,
about
shoot, I have
carbon
to think
credits.
about this.
So, Dr. Lennox, we're back with you. Thank you so much as well for staying with us as we continue this important conversation. So you already quizzed us on our thoughts and what carbon credits is about. So let's hear it from you. What are carbon credits?
Okay. And just continue with the conversation we started earlier. That, as both of you mentioned, that in essence is what carbon credits are, right? It is measured, of course, in tons per carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere, and then that is then monetized. And as stated earlier, either for the most part, there are companies that purchase these carbon credits to try and offset their own carbon emissions in relation to, take for example, some sort of industrial production, or even the airlines, they use it to for the traveling. So that, in essence, that's the core of what carbon credits are.
That's pretty interesting.
And I know you were mentioning about how a lot of large companies or sometimes individuals purchase these carbon credits. Could you talk a little bit about that thought that you were mentioning before?
Yes, and here is where we kind of get into the discussion as it relates to the credibility of carbon credits. When you look at the carbon markets overall, there's the voluntary carbon market, and then there's the compliant carbon market. I think as of May of this year, there's been a total of 64 compliant carbon markets, and this, of course, was registered by the World Bank. It's important to note that the importance of the compliant carbon market in comparison to what we consider voluntary carbon market. For the most part, the voluntary carbon market is what we would consider a market that is, while stable, it is still volatile because it doesn't take into consideration anything that a host country, in this case, like we use the example of Belize. While certain organizations, entities, groups, they might want to sell the carbon credits on the voluntary carbon market, from the onset, it is not Paris Agreement compliant, right? That is the first challenge. Because when you look at some of the credits, what is the rationale, as you mentioned earlier? What is the rationale to actually have carbon credits? We want to, of course, offset what is currently causing that impact on the atmosphere. The voluntary carbon markets, for the most part, what we're seeing, they're just recycling credits. And this is a risk because you're not seeing any true removal. Right? And this is what we want to see, because if we require to curb the impacts of climate change, it's within the next 6 to 7 years. We need to have those credits purchased. Understand the issue isn't the purchasing or the sale of carbon credits, right? It's the mechanism. And certain companies, certain traders, they do not retire the carbon credits, so it's not really contributing to or change. So that is where you then consider credits that are not sovereign credits, right? And these sovereign credits, what we are as a host country, right, are trying to adhere to, because of course we signed on to the Paris Agreement since back in 2015. And this is, of course, a legally binding international treaty on climate change. So it is all integrated to take into consideration. We cannot, it is not recommended we go outside that, because then how will we then know how, as a country, what strides we're taking to increase our overall ambition or climate change ambition if we cannot track or we cannot monitor the carbon credits being traded, or in this case, sold to an entity that is not Paris Agreement compliant.
How will we go about doing that tracking exactly? Because I know there's the recent study of that, knowing that there are fake carbon credits going out. And I'm sure people on their ends, when they're buying carbon credits, they're not like, oh, I really like, especially individual people, because I think companies have that tendency to be a little bit more crossing their T's and dotting their I's as compared to individual people. And so, how can we able to like stop right then and there the overall exploitation of selling carbon credits, fake carbon credits, especially how we're trying to get ourselves into that realm too as well. This is not good for business. So, how will we go for doing that?
Okay, currently what we're doing, we already have certain systems in place to have what we consider sovereign credits. It first needs to be included with our national determined contributions. Apart from that, we have to take stock of our greenhouse gas inventory. So these, either the removal stock of the various greenhouse gases needs to be registered within our national inventory. For the most part, what we're seeing and what I consider the hype as it relates to carbon credits, it's from the FOLO sector, more simply put, the forestry sector, as your colleague mentioned. So, and it needs to be, of course, authorized by the country, and some level of compliance needs to then be issued, because whatsoever is sold, we then need to make that adjustment so it doesn't come off as if Doe believes we're selling the same thing twice, right? So that comes back down to accountability, because we want to show that level of transparency, not only to our international partners, but actually at the national level as well, right? And there are certain methodologies that, again, is aligned with the Paris Agreement, and why these methodologies are key, why these methodologies are important. For example, certain projects, they might claim, just a guesstimation here, they might say, listen, as a country, as one carbon project within or around a protected area, we're estimating we have 50 million tons, right? But when you look at Belize's national inventory, what we have now registered and what we have submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it is little over 5 million. Right? So how then can an entity or an organization then claim 50 million? It all goes back down to the methodology that they use, right? And that methodology might not be PA compliant, thus the reason why it is overestimated. This overestimation, it has implications, because then it might show that we, as a country in its entirety, if we only have a little over 5 million for a certain time period, how then can a singular organization claim in excess of 50 million, right? Yeah. So these are the challenges that we no doubt will face going forward.
Do you also think this overall recent finding of fake carbon credits could be something detrimental to us moving forward too as well, in your perception right now? Because as you know, we're trying to get ourselves set on. We have that
you mentioned
credibility. We also signed on to the
Paris Agreement,
but we also signed on to the green. I'm trying to remember the green fund or something to that. I forgot the exact term for it, but we've signed on to a lot of stuff, and we're getting into the realm of making ourselves have our credentials in order. Do you think this is going to be a big hiccup in the way, or do you think this is going to just like affect us in any kind of way when it comes to moving forward?
So the main thing that we have to take into consideration is, one, as you rightly stated, the agreement, and it's our national determined contribution, right? We do not want, at the end of the day, when we enter into not only a global stock take, but the national stock take, that the numbers are skewed, right? Because then how will we then reach our overall ambition that we want to attain over this period of time if this isn't taken into consideration, right? The implication really and truly, and you stated it earlier, that this process, this discussion that we're having this morning is to raise a level of awareness. Raise the level of awareness is both national and internationally, because we have to take into consideration there is a risk if you start trading credits that aren't sovereign credits. Yes. You might end up in a situation whereby the buyers themselves, they say, listen, you sold me something that is for the most part not eligible for sale, right? So these are things that it's not only as a country, but also as it damages the reputation of institutions that might want to actually take part in the market. And the trajectory that the carbon markets are going right now, most countries, most buyers, the buyers that are offering what I consider very high return purchases is the European Union, China, Australia. The lower tier countries, not so much. But if you have a good product, a credible product, then you can tap into these markets, right? And the only way I would see really capitalizing from the sale of carbon credits is to take into consideration that you need to at least dialogue, build that level of, have that discussion with us to, like I said, it goes both ways. Because it's not to say if your methodology you utilize to tally up what is your overall carbon potential is in alignment, is Paris Agreement aligned, compatible, then we can go forward, right? And it will be something that is going to be mutually beneficial because from one aspect, you won't have issues with your buyers at the end of the day. So they won't be telling you, listen, these credits aren't credible, and you'll be contributing as well to what we want to achieve on our overall climate change agenda for the country.
Dr. Lennox, so thank you. It's been really like learning a lot when it comes to carbon credits. One thing that I'm curious about is what do you think is the motivation for people to go and sell like fake carbon credits? I mean, I'm hearing it, and it's obviously lucrative, and we do not really have the conversation about having that being sold. So, what in your experience, what would motivate people to go and do this? And for the ones that are thinking, how can I get into the business of carbon credits if there's such thing? How can they go about doing that? Because accreditation is very important, as you rightly say, because it gives like the overall perspective as a country, what we're doing, what we're putting out there. But I'm also thinking on the meaningful impact that it has in addressing climate change. So what motivates people to go ahead and sell like fake carbon credits, and how can people get accredited and get into this whole realm of this business?
Okay, I'll respond to your latter question. When you look at the whole accreditation process, was released, I think, last week, it is to let us have that discussion, right? Because there are certain entities that are already in the process of selling carbon credits. At the end of the day, we just want to be as accountable and transparent as much and as realistic as possible, right? So that first step would be to dialogue with the ministry, so we can have that open discussion, and maybe we will. It's a learning exercise, a knowledge sharing exercise, because there might be something that you might bring to the table that we might have missed in the process. So that level of communication, that level of capacity building is required, a level of sensitization, right? So we'll be, of course, sharing this that level of what carbon credits, the same discussion that we're having here right now this morning, right? To some of the various stakeholders and partners who are interested in the sale of carbon credits. As it relates to the rationale to partaking in the carbon markets that are not Paris Agreement compliant, it's at the end of the day, it's more from most instances, and I give examples from other countries, it is more for that monetary benefit, because it is quite a lucrative business. But if you want to, and there isn't an issue with the sale of carbon credits because, but it needs to have a level of environmental integrity. In the absence of that, it's going to be extremely problematic because you run the risk of certain projects actually clearing down pristine forests and then restoring that forest, right? And claiming the credits from that forest, right? Mind you, that that modality, while the carbon stock might be eventual, will have a higher uptake than the pristine forest. You look at the loss of biodiversity by just starting or triggering that process just for the sale of carbon credits, just to gain that profit. So what we're seeing is, let's do it the right way, right? Let's work through the process. So at the end of the day, everybody benefits from the sale of carbon credits, which what we want to see is the country achieving its climate change agenda and contributing to the international climate change agenda. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have one last question, and I'm thinking, we talk about how lucrative carbon credits are. So, what would be a substantial amount of forest for me to say I want to get into this because
I got bush in my bucket,
right?
So I would love to just venture into.
So what is a substantial? Yeah, what is a substantial area you can say, okay, this is feasible and contributes carbon credits?
All right. So when it comes to the benefits, right, they can either be financial or what we consider indirect benefits from the sale of carbon credits. If you're looking at the financial part, the monetary side of it, it varies, right? And it varies because for the small patch of bush your colleague has, it might be minuscule, all right? But if you say, listen, a group, right, the aggregated sum would then be beneficial because then you can really have that substantial contribution, that monetary return. But it's a process, and that carbon, what you consider that carbon budgeting exercise would need to be done, especially based on the respective forest types. Right? So it is not a one size fit all scenario.
So there's no like a
it's not a minimum amount of forest you could have, like
that we can
10
say, okay,
acres.
I have 10
That's
acres
what
and I want to put this.
Yeah, I would need to know if that 10 acres is only bush, if it has
if that really does bush for true.
If it has a couple sapodilla trees on it, right? We would need to know, right, to make that estimation.
Criteria to meet.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's very science driven. It's very technical, right? But it is something that I'm pretty sure the forest department can aid us in, because like I said, it's something collaborative we're doing under the auspice of the ministry. Right.
So your bush might not be the bush that can get you money.
Right.
Just basically, you have to check if the bush are the right bush.
But you have big trees.
That's right.
It needs to be woody. Yeah.
It needs to be woody to a certain degree. Yes. Okay. We must have trees. At least that. Not just normal bush. Okay. So thank you so much, Dr. Gladden, for being here, for sharing so much vital information, but also for letting people understand the need for us to do things the right way. There are processes behind these things. We understand it's a lucrative business, but we also understand too as well, we must do it in the right way by getting accredited, by following everything that we signed on to the Paris Agreement, and knowing that there are detrimental avenues that we have to go down when you don't give the sovereign credits. But thank you so much for this conversation. And with that, we go to our next commercial break. When we're back, we're going to be talking a little bit about crime. Stay tuned for that exciting conversation. We'll be right back.